I think, Jenny, we could probably kick things off. It's
Mhm.
8:02. We're a little slow. See, we're slow this morning. So
No, there we go.
over to you.
All right, let's get a screen up here. There we go. But more importantly, as we love to start on Fridays, and we have, as we've run through 2022, or aim to learn a little bit as we offer our land acknowledgement and recognition. So this morning, offer you the information and no real conclusions, but it was surprising to me that there's an argument, it's a decades-old argument between just how many words our Indigenous people have for the word snow and ice. And then currently it's sitting around 50 to 70, depending on which paper or research you take a peek at. But interestingly, their words for snow and ice, I will do no justice to pronounce them, but Utakwak means all year round ice. And then anik means ice with holes in it. And so there's some definite focus and precision in the words we have for around snow and ice. This took me on a little rabbit trail, so just out of interest. Scandinavia and Russia have 180 words for snow and ice, and interestingly, over 1,000 different words for the word reindeer, which seemed topical for this time of year. And then I went back home, the dear English have only 12 words for snow, largely because it doesn't snow very often. We have an awful lot for rain. And the Scots have 421, my favorite being skelf, which means large snowflake. So really where this comes down to is we do focus on what's central to us, and especially in our northern regions, there's a difference between snow, ice that's all year round and ice with holes on it, literally the difference between life and death. So a little bit of learning there in linguistics, of which I will promise not to be an expert, but far more importantly to all of us, thank you for being here this morning. If, like Craig and myself, you're from Calgary, which is where SAIT's main campus is, we'd love to take a moment just to acknowledge that we are situated on the traditional territory, of the Blackfoot Confederacy. That encompasses our Indigenous people of the Treaty 7 region, which is the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda, and the Northwest Métis homeland. SAIT also acknowledges all of the people who make their homes in the treaty region of southern Alberta. This is a traditional land. Thank you for taking a moment just to recognize where you are this morning. There you go.
Words for snow. There we go. As always, Jenny, I love the way you always adapt these, but that was very well done. So a couple things before we get into our look back on 2022. Tough to believe that we started thinking about all of this back in 2020, Jenny. And I don't know about you, but for me, sometimes time has become warped over the last couple of years. But I believe, speaking of 2022, this is our 20th episode of this year.
Oh, this year, yes.
This year, yeah.
Yes.
I think we are closing in on getting close to 40 overall. We've had just this year over 8,000 people registered to join us, and over 5,000 of you online have joined us over the course of the year. So thank you so very much for that. That is kind of surpassed many of our expectations, but we wouldn't be here if you weren't joining us. And so your support means a lot. And one of the things we've been thinking about is how to evolve our conversations that we're having on Friday mornings. We're always going to continue to bring great thoughts, great content, hopefully great insights around leadership topics. And Jenny, you bring tremendous perspective and knowledge that certainly helps us with that. But one thing we're going to do, because we've been focusing on leadership, we really want to start perhaps digging in and speaking with some local Calgary leaders about their leadership journeys, what leading beyond any title means to them, their leadership wins, their leadership losses, if I can call them that, successes and failures, maybe a better word. But as we go into the new year, we're going to try and mix things up a little bit. And once a month, we're going to try and bring in a local leader and have a conversation around leadership with them. And so hopefully you will find those as interesting and as inspiring as we believe they're going to be. Our first one, we're going to kick off the year right in January 9th. A very good friend of the show, I believe it's the 9th, isn't it?
I think it's the 13th.
Could be the 13th.
We'll let you know.
Again, it's closing in on the end of the year. I'm losing track. But Tyler Chisholm, good friend of the show, tremendous. Tyler is the CEO of Clear Motive Marketing and also runs the Collisions YYC podcast and has tremendous perspective on leadership and has also spoken with numerous Calgary leaders. Friday the 13th. There we go. Thank you, Lisa. So really looking forward to that. Really looking forward to bringing other leaders into our conversations, and hopefully you will enjoy it. And as we proceed, as we go forward, think about other local leaders you might want to hear from.
Yeah.
We'd be happy to try and reach out and engage folks like that. So just a bit of a preview for the new year. Speaking of that, we've had, looking back on the year, Jenny, we've had some great guests that have joined us. We've had Heather McMillan, we've had Evan Wieslake, who's online with us today, and Gina Botello and Tamara Shepard and Deb Herlock from Pembina, as we spoke about diversity. And when we look back on the year, we kind of grouped things into topics around, we either talked about leading ourselves or leading our teams. And as I go through some of the topics that we covered, folks, if there's something that you want us to key in on today, just repeat the word in the chat for me. Excuse me, but when we talk about leading yourself, we looked at resilience, boundaries, communication, feed forward, not feedback, feed forward. When we talked about leading your team, we talked about goal setting, recognition and rewards, conflict, creating a culture of growth, and as I just mentioned, diversity. So very curious, and we also talked about Yellowstone at one point. It's a little Stampede fun. But folks, as you're thinking about what might resonate and what you would like to perhaps double click on today, Jenny, what stands out to you from the past year?
Oh, that's a good question. So I went through all 19 previous conversations and tried to narrow down the slides that we never show, because we often don't show the slides, but they're always there. And you got down to, 60 plus, like it's really hard to put your finger on it. I think always are the questions that come from the audience. And I'm going to cheat here because Emily's popped in and said resilience and boundaries would be great to touch on again. So boundaries was fairly recent. And I think my favorite piece, and now we're going to rely on the technology here. Where is she? This one. Let's see if we can do this. Because if we can't, I'm not trying again today. What did you say about the holidays coming?
Exactly.
There she is. There we go. Okay. So we were talking boundaries, and I had a good conversation on boundaries as always. But one of the key things that stood out to me as we were chatting about this as well is just how often we form our boundaries in our head, which is great, because one of the other parts that we were talking about is when you set a boundary, you set it for you. Like, this is self-care at its real best. But we often don't talk about them. We don't lay them out. We don't make them very clear, either to our team, to our loved ones too, really. Like, this goes all the way across. And this is the funny part, I'm possibly guilty quite a bit too. We get really upset when people cross them, and yet we've never ever said anything about them. And so I think one of the key takeaways from that boundaries conversation was, yes, set them, it's crucial. And we have to revisit them. And you'll remember in that part, it's not necessarily a yes and a no. Sometimes it is. It's often a how much. So they flex a little bit, but also talk about them. Please talk about them. So there you go. That's my start.
Yeah, no, I love that. And it's, I remember when we were in that session, I was thinking about the fact that you're absolutely right. How often do you communicate your boundaries to your team or to others to reinforce, right? We've talked about many times that you can't be a mind reader, and you can't, as a leader, you certainly can't read the minds of your team. And in return, how can you expect them to know what you want if you don't lay out your expectations? Absolutely, Nikki. Boundaries seem to come up when someone crosses them. But to Jenny's point, if they don't know what those are, how do they know they've crossed it? Right. And so, it's, I think it's a conversation leaders are sometimes hesitant to have, scared to have, maybe, right? And especially if you are down the road 1, 2, 3 weeks, months, years of working with somebody, the longer it goes, the more difficult it becomes to go back and hit reset and say, these actually are my boundaries. I know I haven't been enforcing them, but this is where we're at. And so I think the sooner you can have a conversation around it, the better.
Well, and I think so when we talk about emotions and people say, I like to say I feel this, it's very personal. Yeah, it is. But you actually don't have to use the word feel or boundaries. I'm sure why I'm equated the two together, but you don't have to use that. So we get stuck on that because there's so much sort of legacy from it. It's a weakness if you have to say no, it's a weakness if you have to ask for help, which is all rubbish, but we do hang on to those parts. And so sometimes, we were chatting before we came on this morning about how much we need a break. And so it's largely, I've noticed that I don't do very well if I'm answering emails at 10 o'clock at night. I'm going to take some time to actually have my evenings back, and you won't see an answer from me after 5 o'clock. Is that okay? That's if I report to you. On yours and on your side, this is where I'm going to draw the line for the next little bit and try it out. And Jenny, that if you need me, here is the way to get hold of me. Now, there'll always be somebody who will bust that and not use it for the appropriate reason, like the building isn't burning down and they still want to get hold of you. So there is an education piece in that, but I think the key part is starting the conversation. And so for our leaders joining us this morning, or anybody, if to say this is my boundary is really difficult for you, the important part is the conversation about where you need space or help or to draw a line. And sometimes it comes down to, I'm not willing to tolerate that. Same conversation. It's a tough one, but then we're having it.
100%. Just a couple of comments that have come in here. Evan, absolutely classic communication problem. I've thought it 18 times, therefore I must have said it, right? It's so true. How often do you, it's such a common refrain in your, because it's one of your values, it's one of your beliefs. So of course, other people know what my values and beliefs are, right? Yeah, Jocelyn, when speaking about self-care in the holidays, it might be good to hear more in the new year about workload, along with boundaries and burnout. Absolutely. I think we can definitely dive into it. A few weeks off is not the answer to the churn that does not appear to going away. You're right. The time away sometimes can create more stress and boundaries, especially if you happen to be in a situation where you've allowed vacation to build up over the time and you're now being required to use it or lose it, right? It just creates more stress.
Yeah.
Right.
Let's just take a minute. Stephanie's note. So Stephanie's boss. And in fact, anyone who's emailed me recently noticed I have a similar line on the bottom of mine. While it suits me to send this email now, I do not expect a reply outside of your own working hours. That's great. Actually, that's better wording than mine. I have to steal that one.
That is good. All right. But it's to your point, we'll often, if I'm sitting there watching the game and think of something, I will send an email, but I don't expect an answer then. No. The other side of it too, that I would say, is if you know your boundaries are, I'm not going to reply to email at night, turn your notifications off when you don't want to manage emails as well. So that's just, I think it has to go both ways. I think an interesting one too, Jenny, is that what you're really, absolutely, Nikki, you can always tell the leaders or the people that use the delayed send when you get the batch or 6 or 7 of them first thing Monday morning. So, and I know some of my team is probably looking at me right now saying, you do that. Yes, I do.
Good.
But one of the things that we talked about too, Jenny, in this piece around boundaries, it's really about knowing yourself. And you'd had a quote earlier in the year from, I think it was Rick Pitino, right? And the quote or question being, would you work for you?
Yes. Yes. So I'm trying to put two and two together here. So there was a couple of sort of parts that came from that, and in our new leadership journey that we're working with all the time, is this isn't about a model of leadership. There's hundreds of models of leadership out there, and they all have merit, but they're all boxes and shapes that we really don't fit into very well. And so one of our key premises here is know you, because who you are is how you're going to show up, is how you're going to lead. And so then when we take a look at that, we would have been saying, you know, would you hire you? At the end of the day, would you hire you? And you can put that to so many different places. You know, if you're a procrastinator and you get nothing done at the end of the day, would you hire you for that? Okay, where's your focus going to go? How are you going to add your value? How are you going to add your contribution? But I think in that part, we also open the door to, it's not about being better than the person on your right or the person on your left. It's about being better than I was yesterday. And when we come this way and we look at it sort of on a personal piece, it allows so much more growth, because we're focusing on the parts that we need to focus on. And one of my favorites, I've mentioned him a lot this year, John Amici, his book is The 12 Promises of Giants. And in the very early pages, he says, would you recognize your soul in the dark? And I mean, that took the wind out of me. I was walking and listening to it. I'm like, what? You can't say that. Oh, yeah, you can. And do you even know your baseline mood? Do you know how you show up? What's the energy that you're taking into the meetings? Because we're really contagious. We're very contagious. And so if we're not quite checking in on that energy, and we won't always get it exactly right, that's okay. But it makes a difference when we just stop and pause and then take the right energy into the right conversation. So yeah, that was cool.
100%. Yeah, 100%, right? Because how often do leaders, and I think it comes from a really good place, but I don't know how to say this without it sounding weird, so you can decipher this, but you focus so much on your team and wanting to make sure that your team is successful and that the individuals on your team are taken care of, that you just kind of put yourself to the side. And then, you know, at least for me, I do find, you know, from time to time, stuff will build and build and build. And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, crap, what have I been doing? Right. Yep. And so it's this whole thought of how do you, well, you've got a slide to it too, Jenny, I think somewhere around the, you know, it's the old oxygen mask.
Okay, good.
Analogy, right?
Yeah. Let's go there.
So, you know, being a leader doesn't mean sacrificing yourself for your team. I think it means serving your team. So.
Yes. Yeah, I like that. And you know, so that whole, so when we fly, the advice is put your own oxygen mask on before someone else, which we often equate to take care of yourself before you serve or help or whatever others. You know, difficult conversation, if you're not in the right place to have the difficult conversation, then get yourself into the right place. And there's an acronym, everybody loves acronyms. HALT, if you're hungry, angry, lonely or late or tired, you know, take care of that. And then you can, just as we were just speaking to, show up better. I'm not sure that's a great sentence, but we'll use it. And the other piece there, though, is those four are not excuses to not have the conversation. It's simply a flag, take care of it, and then definitely have the conversation. But I think the key thing with this oxygen mask is we all get our oxygen from different places. And so, you know, do you know what fuels your fire? Do you know what lights you up? Do you know the people who make you feel good? Because we spend an awful lot of time with people who don't. And so when we know where our oxygen comes from and it's different for everybody, there's another little boundary piece right there, then we can help ourselves. And if we're helping ourselves, we have so much more to give the people around us, for sure.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Sorry. Emily and Stephanie, that's a good chuckle there. Did you have a snack or a nap? Have a Snickers? Absolutely. There is some truth to that too, though, right? How often, you know, especially if you had kids or have young kids, you know, if they're angry, it's often hunger or sleep. So probably the same for us too, but we try to mask it over sometimes. Daryl, love your comment there. A team is a team to handle everyone, leaders included, right?
Mhm,
So I
mhm.
love that thought of, you know, your team is there to pick you up as well, even if you're the leader of the team. At least that's my
And
interpretation of your comment, Daryl.
but I think that's an important part that we're talking about a lot more now too, is leaders used to kind of be on an island. It was kind of lonely to be out there, and it all hung on a leader, and we can't do that anymore with the pace of work, the transformation of work, the turbulence that is out there, and then throw in what the 2020s have been. You can't go alone. And so now we really talk about, I use the analogy of a boat. It takes two forces to allow a boat to float, you and your team. And yes, we're looking out for them all the time. They're looking out for us. That to me is the indication of a great team.
100%. I just wanted to come back to boundaries before we move on once more, because I think you tied it in here with what the 2020s have thrown at us. We've kind of gone through this period of, and I'm getting to the whole remote hybrid in the office work conversation, where we're hearing more and more that organizations are making the call that you will be back in the office, right? Come January, everybody's going to be back in the office. I'm not sure what the experience for, as I point at the screen here that nobody else can see. So this is all your names over here. So for folks on the line with us, I'd be curious, have you been in that situation where you've been quote unquote forced back to the office? Do you know what's coming? Because I think there's an interesting conversation in boundaries there as well. And as a leader, if you are in a position as a leader where you're kind of between the decree from above that you and your team will come back, you're managing that conversation there, you're managing the conversation here, whether you agree there or not. I don't know what that triggers for you, Jenny, but there's something in that conversation still, I think, that we haven't fully unpacked or quite realized the implication of yet.
It's a difficult one. We could do another whole Friday on this. So I think you speak to the truth of it, the difficulty in managing those conversations, managing expectations, and recognizing the piece that's missing often. And we've said this, as individuals, we want to be seen, heard, and understood. As individuals, we believe that we have continued to do our jobs. There's an awful lot of companies afloat that honestly wouldn't have been afloat if it hadn't been for the work that the people put in when we all got sent home over the pandemic. And so as we readjust now, there are so many different things going on. So one is, why do I have to come to work? I do perfectly well here. And then the other perspective is, yes, but then when we're there, we get the traction, we get the momentum, we get a different connection. And I think the root of it is we have to come back to what is the culture that we have and that we want to have. And so I think our want is to come back to cultures that we had before, although not all of them were brilliant. This could be a huge opportunity. But if we are going to work hybrid or change it, that's really hard work on the culture. So it's very possible we've done a good job, but now we're kind of in that turbulence of, it's almost like an identity crisis. Who are we going to be? What are we going to be? And those are good conversations with your team, but they take time. And I think that's why we keep getting stuck on it, because we just want the answer and we just want to move on. And perhaps it's a longer conversation than that.
Well, I think in what you said there would have to be, because culture, ultimately it is a culture conversation, I believe.
Yeah.
Yes, there's probably some very logistic pieces of you should be in the office to do A, B, and C, right? I'm not getting to that, but it is a culture piece. And if you're expecting your culture to go back to exactly what it was March 15th or so, whatever it was, 2020, it probably isn't, right? But culture doesn't happen overnight, and you've got to be intentional about creating that culture. So I wonder if organizations are perhaps approaching the conversation in the wrong way by just saying, here's your days in the office, or we're all going to be the office, versus saying, here's the type of company that we want to create and the culture that we want to create. This seems a little bit more nebulous. This is simpler. Check,
Yeah.
check, check. You're in Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, right?
There's that wonderful, it's sort of shot around social media recently, and it says, the organization, we want you back because of the culture or something. And then there's a picture of a cubicle, your culture. I would ask people just to question how, if you have the setup with your team, again, we're talking psychological safety. Was it brilliant in March 2020? Was it really the best place to come to and to work? And I doubt the answer is going to be an emphatic yes. And so what are we trying to keep? Where's our opportunity? What can we change as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it begs the question, how many organizations, to use your word, had a brilliant culture in March of 2020?
No.
Right. Just quick scan of the comments here. Absolutely, Evan. It's a what are we managing conversation. Managing people time is easy. Managing their contribution is harder. 100%. This whole thought around, are we measuring outputs? Are we measuring results? There's an argument that could perhaps be made that if you bring everybody back together to regain the socialization aspect, which is huge, it's really important. And I know in speaking with teams that have come back together, not every day of the week, but even for part of the week, it's a huge difference. But you're probably losing some output productivity because that socialization piece. So there's that trade that has to happen, right? So let's see. Yeah, Blake.
I like that.
I like that. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting that SAIT advertises on the side of the building. How do you go back to the way things were? You don't. And yet we're desperately trying to go back to March 2020. It's interesting. Jenny, the other piece that this brings to mind for me is going from, we kind of started to delve into, productivity kind of ties to goals, performance, culture. We talked about culture, a culture of growth. I know you had some thoughts around growth that we could perhaps revisit. And then there was another piece around diversity, I think would be really important to visit, because Deb gave us a really tremendous view of calling out versus calling in, but dealer's choice now. Where do you want to go?
Okay. I'm looking at the slides that we did. Hey, let's do a couple of slides. It's the end of the year. I feel we probably should have a couple. So where were we? 14.
It's funny, after 20 episodes, you're going to show more slides in the 20th than we did in the previous 19.
I am. There we go. And I changed it to, this was our big idea, but I changed it to one of our ideas. And we were talking about, so some companies have abandoned performance management, and some companies are very caught in the system. And that's always a soapbox for another day. But we did have a great conversation around performance goals, because whether you have a performance management system or not, you still have the goals. To your point earlier, we still have an output of productivity, something that we want to look at. And so our conversation sat around, how do you set these goals? What do you need? And for those who were in attendance, there was an extra little slide deck there, BEGIN. And the BEGIN was our acronym that we had created for trying to sort of shift how we goal set, how we have the conversation. So we talked a lot about growth, and I think this was a piece that perhaps you were just mentioning there. And we love to grow, like mastery, as it says there, fuels our intrinsic motivation. And that in the past, we've always looked at, okay, well, here's your weaknesses, you need to grow in that. And that's really tricky, because there's a reason it's a weakness. And so I don't have a mental model for it. I don't have that background. And quite frankly, I don't like it. It doesn't light my fire. I don't want to jump up and get on with this. And so a lot of the message in that conversation that we have was, it is absolutely okay to recognize where somebody's strengths are and help them grow in that as well. Now, sometimes we have to do the weakness things. Don't mishear me here, but the real growth that lights our fire comes from places where we look at it as an employee and say, yes. And so no doubt, I don't remember word for word, but I probably said, what if we looked at a performance preview? What is it that you want to do? How can I help you get there? And as long as that aligns with the team, the department, the company, you're probably on the right track there. And the other piece to that second bullet on there, again, this takes time. So this is continual support. Please don't let people choose to grow and then abandon them, because that doesn't signal that you're there for them at all. And then the other one that we grabbed here too, which I think this is really important because we sometimes forget this. When you're talking about your team goals, those numbers that you have to hit. In fact, we've got 4DX up there. It's one that we use a lot when we're talking in our team, your WIGs and your lead and your lag measures. But that conversation has to have a cadence to it. And if you as a leader aren't focusing on it, talking about it, excited about it, don't expect anybody else to be. So that was our other key piece, was keep that conversation alive and moving, I think, is the key part behind that.
Yeah, lots to pick in there too. So the comment around mastery and purpose and focusing on strengths versus weaknesses, give Marcus Buckingham all sorts of credit in the world around strengths finder and focusing on your strengths and love your job and find your passion and et cetera, et cetera. I think the piece that's always lost in that conversation, and I think you touched on it a bit, right, is you still have to focus on the weaknesses, especially the big ones that are causing you issues. But focusing on strengths doesn't mean you get to just focus on your strengths every minute of every day, of every week, of every month, right? And I think that's where that argument sometimes gets a little too big, right? Well, you said you wanted to focus on my strengths, so I'm going to focus on my strengths and I'm not going to do this part. It's not the way it goes.
It isn't. And in some teams, there's little choice. And I would encourage every now and then, like, step out of the boxes and say, well, what if? And so I'm not going to the far end of your continuum where, everybody gets to do their strengths, but I am going to, do you have people in the right places doing the right tasks? And, the legacy moves are, you have your job description, follow your job description. Whereas the opportunity is, we have these people around the table, and we've said this, people raise an eyebrow maybe when I say this, but when people work for you, they vote for you with their life. Like, all the thousands of hours we put into work, that is a vote for you. And so we're collected, we have all these phenomenal skills. Are they divided correctly? Are we in the right place doing the right thing? And in the everyday day job, yes, there are things that we need to get better to. Chances are we have a strength that will help us with that we're just not recognizing. And so there's a cool part of the conversation. And if there's a whole number of tasks that are left over that are just like the swamp tasks, nobody wants to do them, they don't fit for anybody, or A, are they still relevant? Because an awful lot of things that we still do that aren't relevant. And B, if they are, how are they best divided up? And so, okay, I absolutely agree with you, but I don't think that we pay enough attention to what lights people's fire and what they love in their job. And so it's another one that they quote a lot, Henry Stewart, his performance management, the first question that they ask their employees, what percentage of your job brings you joy?
Yes. Yeah, and so, sorry, I think that's where I'm going with this comment around strengths. Don't get me wrong, I agree. Like, I think focusing on strengths and finding it is, do you during your day at least get to do something with your strengths that lights your
There you go.
fire,
Yeah, there
right?
you go.
Versus, right? So Daryl, and I think I know the quizzical, was that the quizzical emoji or the thinking emoji? I'm not sure what
Yeah.
emoji that is, right? There's so many. I remember when they only used to be 2 emojis. Anyway,
It's a simple one.
the comment that you made there, I think, can you revisit that one about something your people work for you, sorry, based on their life? Like, what was that
I'm
one?
sure
Sorry.
it's not
It
mine.
was isn't that fascinating moment?
So we talked about it. I came across it when I was like diving through everything that we're doing, and we talked about it in our culture conversation. I don't have the slide that it was attached to, but what we were talking about, and I think this is cool, and sometimes it helps to go out. We spend a lot of time narrow focus, and what we were talking about is that your culture at work, the environment at work, has such a ripple effect. So, if I have a bad day at work, if I am every average person, that bad day is coming home with me. And so now my family aren't having a great evening. And then their friends, or they go off and the kids play basketball and field hockey. There is an absolute ripple effect of our days at work. And then we can't all have lovely, wonderful days. Like, some days are tough, but our work and our experience at work has such a knock-on impact in our community. So that's what we were talking about. And then when you recognize that most adults, I think that 50 to 70,000 hours is a career, well, that's more time than I get to hang out with the people that I love. And so that's a vote that says, I like this environment, I am engaged to this, I am attached to this enough to show up every single day. And in most cases, people are showing up every single day doing the best that they can, despite what else is going on. And so I think that we're voting for these jobs with our lives. And we could go into that whole great resignation piece here. That's what we began to recognize.
Okay, gotcha. That's perfect. No, it is. So you get to the 50 to 70,000 hours, and that's a number that just stopped me in my track there for a second.
Yeah.
So I'm starting to think about the Malcolm Gladwell denominator there. So that means 5 to 7 times in your life you've achieved mastery, maybe.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Too funny. Scanning the comments here. Thank you, Brent and Daryl. A couple of good future conversations there that we could definitely take a look at. Marcus's latest book, Love Plus Work, does speak to this and brought up the research from the Mayo Clinic that 20% is the threshold. If you can do 20% doing activities you love, you're likely to experience less burnout. There you go. Perfect.
It's probably a continuum too. So 20% that you love, so X amount that you like. I can't say that I've read that book, but yeah, cool.
Another important topic we touched on this year, and I think it was a good one to kind of lead us towards the end, was the whole diversity, equity, inclusion conversation that we had with Deb Herlock, which for me was one of the highlights. There's many highlights. It's, which one was your favorite? It's like asking me which one's my favorite child.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. Not going to answer that one, depending on what just happened in the house. But your thoughts on Deb's conversation, because I think she left us with a couple really interesting ideas. Calling out versus calling in was the one that really stuck out for me, but where would you like to take that?
So I think it's worth, if we have anybody here, we're bound to, who wasn't with us when Deb Herlock came. I believe that one is on the website, and it's well worth listening to. Like, she has, hold on a second. She has a lot of it's an amazing journey that her and Pembina, where she joined us from, are on. nowhere near done, just as like nobody is ever anywhere near done. That's the whole point. But one of the things that she brought to us was this idea of, can we transition, can we shift from calling people out to calling people in? And it's a consistency in language. People talk about this frequently. And so when we call people out, it's public. It often involves blame and shame. And the whole point, especially within the EDI conversation, is we will get it wrong. Like, we are all learning, and it's uncomfortable learning. There's a ton of discomfort in this. And so calling in, and Deb uses these words beautifully, comes with sort of compassion and accountability. We make it safe. We make it okay that it wasn't right, but here's what we can learn from it, and here's how we'll grow in this space. And so she talks a lot about grace, compassion, and accountability together. And a call-in is a one-on-one conversation. It's an opportunity to do better and avoid the blame, shame, and judgment that actually gets us stuck in those tracks as well. I doubt I've done it justice, as I would say. I'd absolutely head to the recording of that conversation. There was so much in there as well. Yeah, it's cool.
There was, and what I really appreciated about her perspective was, and we've talked about this before too, but just don't be afraid to have the conversation.
Yeah.
Right. I think I'm trying to choose my words carefully here, because I don't want to sound wrong on this, but there's been so much focus on EDI and rightfully so, over the past couple, 3 years, that I think there's an accompanying expectation of perfection from leaders around EDI moments, EDI issues, et cetera. And you're not going to have those. But as a leader, you shouldn't shy away from trying to figure it out, trying to have the conversation, trying to work through any issues that come up. I think a concept that came up for us a couple times this year was, just assume people are approaching conversations with positive intent.
Yeah.
Right. And don't be afraid to lean into it just because it's difficult or challenging, or you're afraid of potentially offending someone or more than someone. So I truly did appreciate her perspective on it. And this whole, the calling out versus calling in, I thought was just a really good way of thinking about it. So, but Jenny, it's at that time. And so what's our one big idea for the year?
For the year, I don't know.
For the year. Yeah, for today, no pressure.
The one big idea for today is a big idea, I think. Oh, we're not moved. There we go. Okay. So it's big. Oh, no, that's the next one, silly. There we go. Okay. So one big idea. I tried to pop a festive theme on here today. So here's a couple of things that we'll leave you with. Sort of thinking back, really. First one for the B, believe. If you don't believe in your team and your people, they won't believe in themselves. I was caught in believing the magic of Christmas. We celebrate Christmas, and I'm a horrible Christmas celebrator. I love it, absolutely love it, and believe in the magic completely. So, let's translate that. What do you believe? Hey, if the goal is there, do you believe that it can be reached? If the person is there and you're giving them an opportunity do you believe in them? Because if you do, they will believe in themselves, because that will just come through. The I is a bit of a grin from me. We're always told to inspire people. People inspire themselves. So rather than trying to inspire your people, look at the environment that you're creating. We've talked a lot about that this year. When I was looking through, there's tons of information there. So if you want to check in with how that environment looks, that's a great place to go to that will help your team to become inspired. And the gifts, I don't need to say anymore. We just talked about them. We all have them. They're called strengths. And know yours as a leader. Absolutely know yours. And if you don't, that's a great noodle for the holidays. And help others to see theirs and use theirs as well. As always, we promised 2 things that you can take away. And as always, I didn't stick to the 2 very well. So a couple of festive fika. Fika is social capital, connecting, getting to know your team. We've done a couple of these actually recently, Craig, in conversations that we've been in. Yeah. But there's tons of Christmas candy out there. Grab some and put a question to each one. So as you're going to drop you in it here, but Craig did this really well with our team. We had to pick a quality street from the tin, and for each one, depending on what you picked, there was a different question that you had to answer. If you're like, oh, I don't know what questions, drop us a line. I'll share some of our questions with you. You can take that another way. Here's our Lint Ball festivity. You fix them as a leader so that everybody matches up with somebody else. So 2 blues, 2 reds, 2 golds, and then give everybody the opportunity to find out things they're in common. If you've been together a long time, put the challenge on there. Find something out that you didn't know about that other person. I promise you, it is always, always possible. And then the last one, if you want to be a little bit more serious, we've talked about culture conversations. You could use the Hershey's Kisses. Red is, what are we going to stop doing in 2023? Silver might be, what would you like to see us start doing? And then green, what will we continue? Quick note here, I would have, if you're going to do that last one, have everybody write their thoughts per the chocolate that they took before you ask them to share them. Then they definitely have something to share. So 3 for the price of 1 right there. Festive fika that you can take away. And then the next one has a serious side to it too. It's been a heavy week for a lot of people, especially with the recent news too. So on its lighter side, as a leader, you're never alone. You have a network. Reach out, ask others how they would see the problem, how they would solve it. But on a far more serious side, because it is a season, I just said, I get carried away in the magic of Christmas, but absolutely stop to remember not everybody is bouncing around at this time of year. This is a struggle. And so for yourself or for other people, if you need to, phone a friend. There is always somebody that you can talk to. And if you get their voicemail, phone somebody else. And please don't go it alone. We can always reach out to somebody. So, oh yeah, and then we're supposed to have 3 questions. And Craig, I didn't even do 3 questions because I reckon I blew my quota this year. So there's no questions to leave you with. Everybody's brain gets a chance to recover. So there's no questions. That's it. 1 big idea and some fikas.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jenny. And thank you to our sponsors of Hershey Quality Street and Lint.
If only.
Yeah. But yeah, thank you so much. Again, everybody that's still on the line with us, thank you. We truly appreciate you joining us. These conversations wouldn't be as rich and robust as I believe they are without your comments, your questions, your participation. Thank you. And Jenny, as always, I appreciate everything you bring to this, and I appreciate you. So thank you so much. I hope everybody is able to have a great holiday season, rest, and celebrate in a memorable way. And with that, we look forward to seeing you all in the new year. Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.